I'm JJ Perez from Inside Runner Sports. That is the Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News, coming to you this Sunday following UTSA's Week 3 victory over Incarnate Word. Greg, the Roadrunners kind of get off the schneid, if you will, with a get right game against Incarnate Word. Um, I started watching the game back. Not a lot to take out of this one, but certainly some good things, some bad things, and some stuff they're gonna wanna, take forward moving on to the season.
Yeah, you don't want to read too much into a game against an opponent that you should beat pretty handily. And UTSA delivered on that part of it in the big picture. So I think there's a huge takeaway just from the positive vibes based on where they were previously and kind of how down the locker room was and the way people admitted that things were kind of tough getting rolling last week after the loss to Texas State. So just to have something positive going in your favor is going to feel good if you're the Roadrunners. And then I think the other thing that I always look for in a game like this is just how well do you hit the goals that you set for yourself? And so what I mean is they talked about the different things they focused on in practice this week, and it seemed like they were able to deliver on a lot of those adjustments and show us something a little bit different just based on the areas that they put under the microscope. So for example, we've talked about the pass rush a lot. And you saw Nana and Yanwu come back and get some snaps, and that could potentially be a lift there. And even just getting 3 sacks after they had 1 sack between the first two games is not some crazy high number. And Jeff Traylor seemed like he wasn't in love with what the pass rush did, but it was signs of progress. And we talked about the cornerbacks group, and Davin Martin came up with an interception. And so it's just you can go up and down with things like that. Jeff Traylor was happy with the special teams too, which we've talked about a lot. So the fact that they had these issues that they identified and they've been able to address them and at least show some progress is just a promising sign for where they could go with, 10 more weeks to work with or whatever it is.
Yeah, for me, just in terms of the actual gameplay, felt like the game was pretty much over at halftime. I think UTSA came out and scored on three of their first four offensive possessions. Obviously, that was boosted by the turnovers by the defense, some good field position. Um, what did you make out of what we saw specifically in the first half from an offense and defensive standpoint?
Yeah, well, some other stuff that they were looking at was, offensively, Owen McCown had not hit it as high of a percentage as we're used to
Yeah.
seeing him. And there was, a comical reliance on screenplays in this game, which is as long as it works. I mean, I know people are upset about it, but they scored 48 points and they had 450 yards or whatever. So it seemed like that's something that was fine for them. And I guess your hope as a fan is that other teams defend them differently, where that's not your game plan every week and
Right.
you can do something more interesting. But if you're going to be able to put up those kind of numbers playing that way, they'll keep playing that way because it seemed like it was pretty free. But people want to see Owen go downfield, and he had the one big completion to Wilson. But yeah, I think generally the fact that they were able to hit a high percentage is a promising sign, just because there had been times where that was missing. Now, the yards per attempt is probably still not great. I didn't look at what the bottom line number was, and I know that was something that Jeff had talked about, given that the run game had been so successful and they feel good about every position on the offense, that number should be higher. But I think generally when you're able to move the ball like this, it's probably not a huge concern.
So UTSA was down three receivers right in this game. We learned after the game that, a few of those guys have been out for a while. But what did you make of Owen's performance overall? He was fairly accurate this week. Obviously, a lot of short passes. We did see a few down the field shots, but it looks like he's sort of getting into the groove that he was in at the end of last season.
Yeah, I think there were only one or two throws that he missed on, whereas in the first couple of games, it felt like there were five or six that he was just sort of a little off the mark accuracy wise from what we're used to seeing from him. And so, from that perspective, I think that that's encouraging. But you probably didn't really need to see that, just in the sense of
Yeah.
we already know that he's got that in him, right? So I think that that's, it's certainly a positive sign, but it's not something that probably changes your outlook for this team too much, because I think Owen's probably not a player you were too concerned with in terms of his level of productivity and what he can bring to the table. It's not like he suddenly kind of took a step back from last year. That would have been really unlikely. So, I think the real test will come when they have to stretch the field a little bit more. The one big pass that they hit was promising. And so that's something that I think maybe if they hadn't hit that, I think it would be even more of a talking point. But we really just, I was looking at the numbers just before we got on the call, passes 10 plus yards down the field
Yeah.
on the Pro Football Focus deal, he's 2 for 6. And at the line of scrimmage or behind, he's, the rough math in my head here, we're looking at like 25 of 27 or something. Like all of his throws were really, really easy. So I think for the most part, it's just something that we'll have to wait and see. But I have a lot of confidence in just his overall ability. And if I'm a UTSA fan, I'm not super worried about Owen McCown.
both Owen McCown and Jeff Traylor said after the game that they wanted Owen to go through all of the progressions this week, and that maybe he was focusing on the first few a little too much. What do you take away from that?
Well, I think it's situational, right? Because in a lot of times, if you're doing these RPOs, which they lean on a lot, you don't really have time to do that
Right.
because
Yeah.
your lineman will be downfield and you'll get a penalty for that based on the way the play's blocked. So, I know against A&M. Trailer said after the game, they didn't even give him the opportunity to show that stuff. Everything was a
Right.
quick pass designed to get the ball out quickly because they knew that the protection might not be able to hold up. I think against Texas State, you had a little bit more of a glimpse of what he could do in that sense, and there, it was hit or miss, just like we talked about, where there's some throws that didn't always get to where he wanted them to be. And I think he made one pretty bad decision in that game that should have been intercepted, but maybe I'm thinking of A&M still. But
Yeah.
and then yesterday it was another case of they just didn't need him to do too much. So in terms of how well that part progresses with the progressions, I think it's just sort of it remains to be seen when there really is a bigger test in that way. But I think, yeah, if you're going to have a game like this where things are that easy for you, you're just going to take it, I think.
Right, right. Let's talk about Robert Henry. This guy keeps popping off these long runs every single week, Greg. It's one time is I mean 3 times is not a fluke, right? For him to have this sort of production, a buck 44, a few yards of 100 and short of 150 yards. He just continues to be on a tear with these with the way he finds the holes, the way he hits the holes, and he makes defenders miss.
Yeah, they should have gotten him one more carry to get to 150
Yeah.
because this to have 5 straight games of 150 yards and 2 touchdowns
Ooh.
is special.
Yeah.
Not 144, not too bad either, and he's
Yeah.
still the first player that UTSA has ever had go for even 105 straight games. So, from a record settings perspective, he's already done what he needs to do there, and I can't even. This is impossible to look up, but to have a 75-yard touchdown on the first snap of the first game, and then a 75-yard touchdown on the second snap of the second game, and a 74-yard touchdown on the third snap of the third game. I guess watch out for the fourth play of the third quarter next week
Yeah,
because
right.
that's sort of the trend that he's been on. But it's an unknowable thing that you could never possibly look up just because of the way records are kept and things like that. But I can't remember anything like that. I can't imagine anybody's ever had 70 plus yard touchdowns on the first drive of a half, three weeks, and like that's such a
It's
ridiculous thing.
nuts. Yeah.
Surely I guess we'll ask him this week, like, is there something about how you come out of the locker room after halftime or whatever? But it's just so astronomically unlikely. But his productivity has been a nice surprise. I know last year running back position that the conversation was like, wow, that coming into the year, just the level of depth and talent at that position is kind of unlike anything that it could rival any position group in UTSA's history, and they just didn't sort of live up to that. It ended up being that some certain guys were disappointing, certain guys didn't see the field as much, and the running game was pretty kind of average. And this year there was not as much hype around it, but obviously Robert Henry getting that extra year was going to be the guy who was going to be kind of your lead back. And everybody's talked about how he's changed his body and how things are just kind of different now, but he looks like an even more dynamic player compared to where he was a bear to tackle before. Now it's like guys aren't even getting to him. So
Right.
they have to solve that problem second because now it's harder to even get your hands on him than it was previously.
Yep. Yep. Also credit to the offensive line there for making some holes for them. Greg, let's wrap up the offense by talking about the tight ends and wide receivers' contributions and display in this game. A lot of tight end use, a big game from Devin McEwen, and then we saw AJ Wilson kind of emerge as an option here. Obviously, a trio of wide receivers injured and not dressed in this game. What do you take away from what we saw from the wide receivers and tight ends?
Yeah, Wilson's interesting because I think he provides a little bit of a deep threat. I mean, you got to talk about DJ Allen too, because
Yep.
it was sort of uncertain to what extent he'd be willing to, or willing is the wrong word, to what extent he'd be able to contribute based on
Yep.
the recovery from the knee injury that he had last year. And so to see that both of them have been able to get involved and integrated in this offense is pretty promising, especially with David Amador out. And I think Devin McEwen is still deserves to be regarded as that number one
Yep.
option, the top guy in the room, and just he can hurt you in a lot of different ways. He is a capable deep threat, but he's got some quickness to him and shiftiness, and we've seen him catch short passes and make guys miss at times this year to turn it into a couple extra yards. And so he hasn't had the astronomical yardage numbers yet, but I think that he could very easily get there. And then the tight ends group gives them so much
Yep.
flexibility and versatility. They're not afraid to line those guys up wide, and so you can come out with a package that looks like it's a running back and two tight ends and two receivers, and then it turns out it's four receivers and one running
Yeah.
back. And so the idea that they can kind of keep people off guard in that sense has made the tight end a really valuable position group for them. So yeah, I think we felt good about all those guys coming into the year, and there's been nothing that would change my stance on that in any way.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of angst about play calling and screenplays and things like that. I know we heard some fans' frustration during the game yesterday.
Yeah.
I just think a lot of that's the how the opposing defenses are going to play, and they're putting some stuff on film early that it makes you seem like they're going to do some other stuff later. It feels like the best offense is still ahead for the Roadrunners.
Well, yeah, we were having fun with it too. Just like
Yeah.
any random play, somebody will just in the press box will just be like, this could be a good time to drop a screenplay here. I think that could work because it just felt like, I don't know. I would love to see the numbers on it. I'm too lazy to do it myself, but it was like it felt like half of the play calls were some sort of screen or swing or dump off. And not all screens and dump offs are created equal, but from the fans' perspective, a short pass is a short pass, and it's just not that exciting to watch. So it hurts a little bit that they didn't break any of them for huge gains. I guess
Yeah.
McEwen scored on the
McEwen's touchdown. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. A
that
few
was
of them.
you
Few of
had
them.
you had watched about 30 or 35 of
Yeah.
them by that point. So
Yeah.
at that point, it was a little bit too little too late for the excitement factor. So, but yeah, like we talked about, I mean, if that works for them and they put up those kind of offensive numbers, they'll do that against everybody. And if not, we'll see what they have else other than that. But it's too early to panic about it, I think.
Let's jump to the defense. Another big solid performance by Shad Banks. He continues to deliver and kind of outperform any reasonable expectations. One area I'll throw at you too is I think we saw a little bit of production from that will linebacker spot in this game, which is still going to be a question moving forward. But those are my two big takeaways. Like, hey, we saw something at the will that they could work with maybe, and Shad just continues to be a super an interception, a fumble recovery, something on the hands team. I guess I wasn't paying attention on. So yeah, a big game.
Yeah, I will admit, we get into this pattern where, I'll just keep it specifically to UTSA, but they'll sign these guys who have played at power conference programs and we'll just assume that there's some five-star recruit out of high school who's going to come in here and be awesome. And it just doesn't always work that way. Sometimes there's a reason that whoever it was wasn't playing at that level. And Shed had some productive years at TCU, but it was when the team was kind of down and when there were some injuries at the position and he was on the field because they didn't have a lot of other options. And so that's why I think you saw his last year there. He ended up sliding down the depth chart and wasn't really involved. And so as a guy who didn't play at TCU when everybody's healthy, going to come in here and be a game changer. I didn't think necessarily that that was guaranteed, but we have, months and months and months to talk ourselves into it. So then by the time the season gets here and he's got the number zero jersey, we're like, all right, this is the guy. But he really has been that. He's
Yeah.
over delivered, I think, on what I thought for sure by far, and I think what anybody would have expected, given that the expectations for him were already pretty high to begin with. That's saying something. So, to be able to be a part of that many turnovers when I think we spent time they all blend together. I don't remember if it was
Yeah.
last year or the year before or both, but we've spent a lot of time wondering about where UTSA's turnovers are going to come from. And sometimes it seems like they didn't have those kind of big plays that were swinging the momentum of games. And he's, been around the ball enough that he's been a part of a few of those already, just a quarter of the way through the season. So yeah, I think you're getting more than you could have ever expected out of Shad Banks, and the Roadrunners will hope that that can continue because having that guy who is a difference maker there and not just kind of making the plays that he needs to make, but is actually kind of generating some real value in terms of the takeaways and the disruptive plays and the havoc stuff that they call it is extremely valuable.
And then what's your take on what we saw at will linebacker position this week?
Yeah, it's nice that they have another option. I mean, we'll
Yeah.
see what Nana can do. UIW's offensive line is probably a little bit undersized compared to what you'll see once the whole rest of the season, really. And then athletically, maybe not at the same level. They always say that's like the hardest position to find guys just because there's only
Yeah.
so many big talented humans who can move and can hold up size wise in that sense on the offensive line at the FBS level. So it's going to be a different kind of test. It's not like 3 sacks against a team that passes that much was this enormous total. But those offenses are also designed to get the ball out pretty quick. And so
Yeah.
generally, I think it remains a work in progress. I don't feel like that's a situation that is solved, but having Nana back there as another option, he was pretty disruptive in the snaps that he played. He looks like he's another guy we've had years now to talk
Yeah,
ourselves into what he could be when he shows up, and you just don't know what it's going to actually look like when he gets on the field, just because he didn't have this outstanding resume. He just got just a guy they brought in from junior college who had been talked up in camp and things like that. And so to see it translate a little bit to the field with some potential, because he could maybe he'll just get
yeah,
healthier too, and,
right.
and then we'll be even better than what we saw yesterday. So I think that there's a lot of potential there. I'm more optimistic about it than I was last week, but it's still certainly a red flag when if like somebody who had never seen UTSA play this year asked me what's going on with this team, I'd be like, well, this is still a position they're worried about. So
Yeah,
it's progress, but a lot of work to go.
yep. When I look at the pass coverage in this game, the play of the secondary, do I almost want to divide it into two different games, right? Because you had a first half where the defense was pitching a shutout,
Hmm.
and it looked like UIW couldn't do anything. And then, UIW makes the quarterback change, and obviously UTSA didn't game plan for that style of quarterback, and he was able to move the ball and make some plays there. So, some good things there, some bad things there. I think there's reason for optimism and also reason areas they got to still continue to improve on in the pass game.
Yeah, I think it's just like what I was thinking with the will linebacker spot, where corner especially is still a concern, but maybe not as much as it was before. I mean, we saw Devin Martin make a play and to get the interception, which, if you can come up with a play like that, that's hugely impactful and a lot of a game changer in terms of what that group can bring to the table. And then the other guys, I just think we're still uncertain about just how good they are, to be honest. And so it'll be a progress through the year of getting more eyes on them and getting a sense of how they develop with that experience and that playing time. KK Myers played some, so he's probably relatively close to a finished product. But a guy like Jacavian Rogers is presumably going to get better with more snaps. And so I do think that that's an area that's far from solved, but they certainly in the first half did what they had to do. In the second half, I think maybe the quarterback EJ Colson's ability to extend plays might
Yeah,
have made it so they have to sort of cover longer and differently than how they planned on. But that could just be kind of making excuses for them too. I'm not exactly sure, what impact that had and how they were calling it and how they would have called it had they known that there was the potential to see Colson in the game. So you would love to see them be able to blanket guys a little bit better in that second half. But UAW is a good offensive team too, and
yeah,
especially with that kind of a system guys are going to get open eventually and you're going to put up some points. And that being said, they didn't have their best receiver. So you would think it would have been a little bit easier for UTSA to hold up there. But I don't know. I think it's still a red flag, but maybe not completely devastating, going to undermine the whole season kind of red flag.
I got you. The Roadrunners come up with their first win. Greg, I think I called it a get right game. It's just you feel good, but I don't know that the fan base or even the coaches and players aren't going to feel great about, you know, starting 0-2 and then coming away with their first win. UTSA might reel off a few wins here, and they still might kind of still have that bad taste in their mouth from how the season started.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting because I think the UTSA team is better than the average UTSA fan believes it is, but I also think the schedule is a lot harder than the average
Yeah,
UTSA fan believes it is. So we might end up where my
somewhere in the
perspective,
middle, somewhere in the
right?
middle, I
I
think.
think my perspective and the fans' perspective is probably about the same from a wins and losses perspective, but I think it's because the schedule is hard and they think it's because the team's not that good. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So I just think the way the American Conference looks this year, these games against North Texas is a toss-up.
yeah,
Tulane's a toss-up. South Florida, you're probably going to be an underdog in that game, although by then it could be a toss-up. And even like East Carolina and Army look good. Like
yeah,
none of these, like there's three games that look like UTSA will be a significant favorite, and that's in the conference season. I think next week they'll probably be about a 10-point favorite at Colorado State, which the way everybody's talked about Colorado State, I think that might surprise some people, but that team was not very good in terms of like the advanced metrics and the predictive stuff last year, even though they put together a pretty good record. And that has sort of continued so far this season, where I think the odds makers will lean pretty heavily towards UTSA's side in that one. So we'll see if they deliver on that. But generally, I think this could be so what are they 1-2 now?
yeah. The next three games are those three games you're talking about.
Right.
So
So they got to win those, and then you're at 4-2.
yeah,
And then
North Texas.
you got one more with five, and then you split the rest of them. So yeah, you could get to 7-5 or 8-4, and I think that's an okay season, but it is not likely to be. Well, I don't know. Maybe everybody just beats each other up in this league because there's
Yeah,
a lot
who
of
knows? Yeah,
like somebody could just kind of put it together and run the table. I'd have to look at everybody's schedule and see who plays the hardest amount of games. Like all these teams are good enough to do it, but man, like when you look at G6 landscape, if you even want to think ahead to what the Pac-12 is going to look like next year, the American is so far ahead of all those other leagues right now. It's not even competitive. We do like I vote with this, I think it's Hero Sports does it, the G5 top 25.
Yep.
Like last week, I think our top three teams were all American teams, and it's going to be like, you know, probably about five or six of the top 10 and like eight or nine of the top 20. Like there's because all those teams I just mentioned are good. And I didn't
Yep.
even talk about Navy and Memphis because they're
Right.
not GSA schedule, and those teams are really good too. So somebody might be able to put together enough wins, but they might all beat each other up, and maybe at the end
Yep.
of the year, UTSA is 4-3 or 5-2 I don't even remember how many conference games they play. Those are probably the wrong numbers. They play eight,
Eight.
right? So they'd
Eight.
have to go
Yeah.
5-3 or 6-2. Maybe that's enough to get you in the mix, just based on everybody kind of taking care of business against each other. So I don't think UTSA is one of the best teams in this league right now, but I think they are kind of in that like second tier. Like they're good enough that if they jump up and beat somebody, they could get in the conversation. But they obviously know they have a lot of areas to clean up.
Yeah. I would put UTSA in the upper half of the American at this
Yeah,
point.
that's fair.
And I think there's probably two or three teams that are kind of at the very top. And to your point, I do think we're going to start to see some cannibalism once they start playing each other, right? It's just the league is a quality league, so I think that'll be kind of fun and interesting to watch. We'll see how that
Yeah.
goes.
It's those games like that. It's like the team like East Carolina that people aren't even talking about, who has quietly put together a pretty strong start to the year and is gonna like they beat Coastal Carolina by like a billion points yesterday.
Yeah,
UTSA played them in a bowl game last year,
yeah,
So I think when you start thinking about like a team like that is good enough to beat Memphis or something, then that's when it starts getting really weird. So I don't even know if those two play each other. I'm just picking kind of
yeah.
at random, but it's like all those teams can take care of each other on the right circumstances.
Greg, the Roadrunners come up with a big win. Not, I guess let's talk about attendance. I don't know if this is a huge deal or not. In my mind, this was probably always going to be one of the lowest attended games, but you have kind of the letdown factor after the Texas State win. I'm sure that would have been some sort of, increase in several thousand had the Roadrunners won. What was your take out of yesterday's kind of attendance and atmosphere in the Alamo?
I'm gonna pull it up while we're talking. I
Yeah,
can't remember the last time when UIW played here. It was 26-7-87 in the
yeah,
2019 game, but that
right.
was also a season opener, so maybe
Yeah.
that's a little bit of a bump. Where um, this year it was 24-21. So yeah, it's so weird to think back to that 2019 game because of how different everything was then. That was Frank Wilson's last year, and
Yeah.
UIW was just sort of starting this ascension. So on paper, both programs are in a much better place now, where you would
Right.
think this one would be kind of highly attended. But UTSA lost some momentum to start 0-2, and UIW has just never been able to average huge crowds anyway. There were some people in red there, and they made a little bit of noise when UIW scored, but generally speaking, they don't draw very well for their home games, so it's not a surprise that in the Alamo Dome it wouldn't be any different. But I don't know. I think it's too early to sound any kind of alarms on that. UTSA is going to trend towards a pretty strong average this season just because the opener was so good. And like we just mentioned, I mean, these home games coming up there's Rice, which
Homecoming.
well, okay, yeah, right. Is that the
Yeah.
Hall of Fame game? Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
So for whatever that's worth, could be a little bit of a bump. But then you're looking at Tulane, East Carolina, and Army, which are three really good
Yeah.
games. So if UTSA plays well enough, if they start off the way we just talked about, facing some of the lighter opponents in the league and are able to take care of business in those games, where those games have sort of conference, if not conference championship stakes, then at least like to be able to kind of hang in that conversation for a little while longer, then maybe you do see a pretty good year attendance wise. But I don't think there's worth reading too much into. If it was like 14,000 or something, we could have a conversation about it. But to crack 20 in a game like that is fine. There were a few games last year. Actually, there were four games last year that were right about 20. They
Yeah.
dipped as low as 17. I think that was a weeknight game, so that kind
Right.
of got weird. And then they had a 21 and they opened with 25. So like that's not too far off from where they've been. So to have such a strong opener that they're riding the back of now, I think that a little dip like that is not so alarming.
Yep. Well, Greg, it's we're into it every week. Roadrunners hit the road. I guess first airplane trip of the season, Colorado State. We'll both be there. I'm excited to get to Colorado. Some beautiful weather. It looks like we'll see. So, we'll see if the Roadrunners can continue their upward trend. Greg, do you think we hit on everything out of this week?
I think so. We went through all the different positions, and it's just been, for a game against an FCS team, I think we gave them what we needed to give them. We'll see what we can talk about next week once we see against a road test against an FBS level opponent and what that looks like.
Yep. Well, that'll wrap it up. I'm JJ Perez with Inside Runner Sports, Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News. Hey, real quick, 25%, 25 cents to join Greg Luca's Express News website,
Oh, value.
a dollar to join mine. So yeah, if y'all like what y'all hear,
That's
yeah,
crazy.
give us a click on the internet. So we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for watching.